No commercial airline pilot's first flight with real passengers on board is also their first flight ever. No surgeon's first incision on a real patient is also the first incision they've ever made in their life. Every high-stakes skill that involves real consequences for failure has, somewhere in its training pipeline, a stage where the person is allowed to fail without the failure being catastrophic. Trading is one of the only high-stakes financial skills where beginners are routinely told to skip that stage entirely and start with their own money on day one. That's the argument in this video, and it's going to be more controversial than it sounds because prop firms have a genuinely mixed reputation. Some of the criticism is fair. I'm going to walk through that too, honestly, not skip past it. But underneath the noise around prop firms is a structural argument that almost nobody makes. Clearly, and once you see it, you'll understand why the beginners who start on an evaluation account, not a live one, tend to still be trading 5 years later, while the ones who fund a live account first tend to not be. Let's start with the actual problem, because most of the debate about prop firms happens without anyone naming what beginners are actually up against. A brand new trader has 3 things working against them simultaneously, and almost every piece of advice online addresses only one of the 3. The first is skill. They don't yet know how to read a chart, size a position, or manage a trade in real time. The second is psychology. They haven't yet built the emotional tolerance for watching money move in real time without panicking. The third, and this is the one nobody talks about, is capital fragility. Whatever money they're trading with is usually money that matters to them personally. Savings, a bonus, sometimes money they can't actually afford to lose. Dressed up as money they can. Here's the part that matters. Skill and psychology can both be trained. Capital fragility cannot be trained around. If the money in the account is money you need, no amount of preparation removes the emotional weight of watching it disappear. You can read every book on trading psychology and still feel your stomach drop watching your rent money swing by $400 in either direction. That feeling doesn't respond to information. It responds to stakes. This is where prop firms enter the conversation, not as a marketing pitch, but as a structural fix to exactly this problem. A prop firm evaluation, at its core, is a way to practice the full experience of trading, real market data, real-time pressure, a real target, and real rules, without the capital fragility problem attached. You pay an evaluation fee, usually somewhere between $50 and a few $100 depending on account size, and if you fail, which most people do, you've lost an evaluation fee. Not your rent, not your savings, not the down payment you've been building toward for 2 years. Let me introduce the 2 people whose stories actually illustrate this, because the theory only means something once you see it play out. Jason had just come into a small inheritance, about $18,000, after his grandfather passed. He'd been curious about trading for a while, watched a handful of videos, read a couple of books, and decided the inheritance was his sign to finally start. He opened a live brokerage account and funded it with $12,000, keeping the rest as a cushion, or so he told himself. His very first month went well, up about 11%, and that early win did something to his brain that no amount of warning could have prevented. It convinced him he had a talent for this. The second month, a trade moved against him, and instead of taking the loss his plan called for, he held, because some part of him, the part that had just felt like a natural at this, refused to accept that the market could be right and he could be wrong. He held for 9 more days. The position kept sliding. By the time he finally closed it, he'd given back the entire first month's gain and then some. 6 weeks later, the account was down to under $3,000. He still trades occasionally today, but he'll tell you, if you ask him honestly, that some part of him never fully recovered from watching a piece of his grandfather's money evaporate over a decision he made out of pride instead of a plan. What strikes me most about Jason's story isn't the loss itself. Losses happen to everyone who trades long enough. It's what the loss did to his relationship with the activity going forward. He became gun-shy in a very specific way, cutting winning trades early out of fear of repeating the 9-day hold, which created a new problem layered on top of the old one. A trader who now exits good trades too early, because the last time he didn't exit early, it cost him almost everything. That's a common pattern with capital that means something personally. The lesson doesn't land as manage your risk better. It lands as a kind of financial trauma that then distorts every decision after it, sometimes for years. He's mentioned more than once that he wishes he'd started with far less money, or with money that didn't carry his grandfather's name attached to it, because the size and meaning of that first loss shaped every trade he's placed since, in ways that have nothing to do with markets and everything to do with fear. Priya started the exact same year with roughly the same amount of trading knowledge, maybe slightly less. But she didn't have $18,000 sitting around, and she wasn't willing to risk what she did have. She paid for a prop firm evaluation instead, a little under $200 for a shot at a funded account. She failed it. Failed the second one too, a few months later for a different reason, oversizing a position out of frustration after a string of small losses. Neither failure cost her more than the evaluation fee itself. On her third attempt, nearly a year after she'd started, she passed, and the funded account she received was larger than what she'd have been comfortable risking with her own money at that stage regardless. More importantly, by the time she was managing that funded account, she'd already lived through the exact emotional experience Jason had. Holding a losing position out of pride, oversizing after a loss, except she'd lived through both of those mistakes for the price of 2 evaluation fees, instead of the price of a chunk of an inheritance. That's the actual comparison. Not prop firms are a shortcut to riches, and not live accounts are the only real way to learn. It's that the exact same beginner mistakes are going to happen to almost everyone. Because they're not knowledge mistakes, they're experience mistakes, the kind you can only learn by living through them once. The only real question is what those mistakes cost you the first time you make them. Jason paid roughly $9,000 in tuition for lessons Priya paid $400 for. Same lessons. Wildly different tuition. It's worth sitting with what Priya's second failure actually looked like, because it wasn't a market problem, it was the exact same problem Jason had, just caught earlier, and cheaper. After 3 small losing trades in a row, she widened her position size on the 4th trade, telling herself she was due for a winner and wanted to make the loss back faster. The trade went against her, breached the daily loss limit built into the evaluation, and ended her attempt for that month. It stung. She said as much. But by the following morning, she'd already logged what happened, named the exact behavior, oversizing after a losing streak, and rebuilt her plan around a hard rule against it before her next attempt. There was no aftertaste of shame, no sense that she'd damaged something meaningful, because $200 doesn't carry the same weight as a chunk of an inheritance. She was free to study the mistake with something close to curiosity instead of dread. And that difference in emotional tone, curiosity instead of dread, is arguably the entire value of the structure. I want to be fair to the skeptics here, because there are real, legitimate criticisms of the prop firm industry, and pretending otherwise would make this a worse argument, not a better one. Some firms have opaque or unfair rule structures, hidden consistency requirements that make passing evaluations harder than advertised, or payout policies that make it difficult to actually withdraw money once you're funded. Some firms have had legitimate disputes with traders over broken rules that felt arbitrary or unclearly disclosed. This is a real industry with real bad actors mixed in with legitimate ones, the same way any fast-growing financial niche attracts opportunists. None of that invalidates the structural argument about capital fragility. It does mean the choice of which firm you evaluate with matters enormously, and that due diligence, checking payout history, reading the actual rule set closely before paying for an evaluation, reviewing independent trader experiences rather than affiliate-funded reviews is not optional. The structural advantage of practicing with someone else's capital only holds if the firm you choose actually pays out reliably when you succeed. Choose carelessly, and you've just added a new risk on top of the old one instead of removing it. There's a second criticism worth naming, honestly, which is that the profit split and fee structure of prop firms means the firm itself profits heavily from evaluation fees, regardless of whether any individual trader ever gets funded, which creates an incentive for some firms to make evaluations harder to pass than necessary, or to design rule sets with technicalities that increase failure rates. This is a real dynamic in parts of the industry, and it's a fair reason for skepticism about the business model in general. But notice that this criticism, taken to its logical end, argues for choosing your firm more carefully. It doesn't argue against the underlying structural logic of practicing with capped, external capital before risking your own. A flawed version of a good structure is still a reason to shop carefully, not a reason to throw out the structure and go straight to live capital instead. With that acknowledged, let's get into why the evaluation structure itself, separate from any individual firm's reliability, does something for beginners that a live account structurally cannot. The first reason is that an evaluation has a defined finite downside. You know exactly what failure costs before you start. That's not true of a live account, where the honest answer to "what's my downside" is usually "however much I let it get away from me," which for a beginner without a proven process is an unknown and often much larger number than they expect walking in. This matters more than it sounds because the human brain handles known bounded risks very differently from unbounded ones. A $200 evaluation fee is a decision your brain can fully process before you begin, the same way you'd process the cost of a class or a course. An open-ended live account, where the worst case is theoretically your entire balance, keeps a low hum of anxiety running in the background of every trade, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And that background anxiety is exactly the kind of noise that degrades decision-making under pressure. The second reason is that evaluation rules force discipline, structurally rather than relying on willpower. Most prop firm evaluations include a maximum daily loss limit and a maximum overall drawdown limit, enforced automatically by the platform, not by the trader's own restraint. A beginner trading their own live account has no such backstop. Nothing stops them from doubling down after a bad day except their own judgment. And their own judgment, in the moment a trade is going wrong, is precisely the thing that hasn't been trained yet. The evaluation environment installs the guardrail externally while the internal one is still being built. Think of it the way you'd think of a learner's permit that comes with a supervising adult in the passenger seat. The point was never that the supervisor drives for you. It's that the supervisor exists as a hard stop for the exact mistakes a new driver is statistically most likely to make, at exactly the stage where those mistakes are most likely. The third reason is that failing an evaluation carries a completely different psychological weight than blowing a live account. Failing an evaluation feels like failing a test. Annoying, maybe a little embarrassing, but recoverable, the kind of setback you shake off and try again from. Blowing a live account, especially one funded with money that had meaning attached to it, an inheritance, a bonus, savings earmarked for something else, doesn't feel like failing a test. It feels like a personal failure, and that distinction matters enormously for whether someone keeps trading and improving or quits altogether, ashamed, after one bad stretch. This is not a minor psychological footnote. The single biggest predictor of whether a beginner eventually becomes competent isn't talent, it's whether they're still trading and reviewing their mistakes. 18 months in, and shame is one of the most reliable ways to make someone quit early, long before the learning curve has had time to bend upward. The fourth reason is repetition speed. Because the cost of failure is so much lower, a beginner can go through the failure review retry cycle far more times in the same period. Priya failed twice and passed on her third attempt within about a year. If she'd been trying to build that same experience live, funding a new account after blowing the previous one, she'd have needed thousands of additional dollars to get the same 3 attempts, assuming she even had thousands of additional dollars sitting around to keep trying with, which most beginners don't. Skill in any high-stakes discipline compounds through repetitions, not through hours spent thinking about the skill. A beginner who gets to fail cheaply 3 times in a year is, in a very real sense, 3 repetitions ahead of a beginner who could only afford to fail once with the same amount of money. None of this means a prop firm evaluation is a substitute for skill. It's not a shortcut around learning to read a chart or manage risk. What it changes is the cost of the mistakes you're going to make anyway while you're learning those things. And it removes the specific kind of fragile, personally meaningful capital that makes those early mistakes hurt in a way that clouds judgment rather than sharpening it. There's an identity shift buried in this too, one that matters more than the financial argument on its own. A beginner who starts on a live account with meaningful personal capital is, whether they realize it or not, treating their first year of trading as if it's supposed to already be the real thing. Every trade feels like it counts, because in a very literal sense it does. It's their money. Right now, on the line, a beginner who starts on an evaluation is implicitly telling themselves something different. This is practice. This is where I'm allowed to be bad at something before I'm good at it, the same permission a resident gets in a hospital or a student pilot gets in a simulator. That permission changes how mistakes get processed. A mistake made with permission to fail gets studied. A mistake made with money you needed gets buried, denied, or repeated out of desperation to win it back. There's a version of this idea in almost every other apprenticeship model that exists. We just don't usually name it explicitly. A law student's first mock trial isn't held in front of a real jury with a real defendant's freedom on the line. A chess player's first serious losses happen in local tournaments with nothing but rating points at stake, not world championship matches. In nearly every domain where skill takes years to build, there's a deliberately constructed period where the stakes are low enough that failure teaches rather than punishes. Trading culture, for reasons that mostly come down to how easy it is to open a live brokerage account with a few clicks, skipped past building that stage for most retail beginners. Prop firm evaluations, imperfect and inconsistent as the industry is, accidentally rebuilt that missing stage, even if that wasn't the primary intention behind why they exist. Here's the boring truth underneath all of this, and it's going to deflate some of the excitement around prop firms specifically, because the excitement is usually attached to the wrong part of the process. The value of a prop firm evaluation was never the funded account at the end of it. Plenty of traders pass an evaluation, get funded, and then blow the funded account anyway within a few months. Because passing an evaluation doesn't automatically fix the underlying psychology. It just delays when that psychology gets tested, with real consequences attached. The actual value of the evaluation is the repetitions it lets you take before that test arrives. If you treat the evaluation as a lottery ticket to a funded payday, you'll miss the entire point, and you'll likely fail for the same reasons Jason did, just with someone else's money on the second try instead of your own. If you treat it as cheap, structured practice, specifically because the downside is capped and the rules are enforced externally, while your internal discipline is still forming, it becomes one of the more sensible on-ramps into this profession that currently exists. It's worth being precise about what sensible on-ramp actually means here, because it's easy to hear all of this and swing to the opposite extreme, treating a prop firm evaluation as some kind of guaranteed path to competence. It isn't. Most evaluation attempts still fail, the same way most beginners at anything fail their early attempts. The claim isn't that evaluations make success more likely on any given attempt. It's that they make the cost of the attempts you're going to need, because you will need several, low enough that you can actually afford to take them, review them honestly, and come back for another, one without the process bankrupting you or breaking your relationship with the activity entirely. That's a modest claim. It's also, for a beginner standing at the start of this with limited capital and limited experience in roughly equal supply, probably the single most useful thing anyone can tell them before they open their first account. So here's where this leaves you if you're a beginner weighing this decision right now. You have Jason's path in with real, personally meaningful capital from day one, learning the same lessons everyone learns the hard way. At whatever price your account happens to be funded with, no floor on how expensive that tuition gets. Or you have Priya's path, slower to reach a funded account, more failures along the way. Each one small, contained, and survivable, arriving at real capital only after the expensive lessons have already been paid for in a currency that doesn't follow you home at night. Neither path guarantees you become profitable. Nothing does. But one of them lets you fail your way toward competence for the price of a few evaluation fees, and the other one lets the market decide, without warning, exactly how much of your own money that same education is going to cost you. Choose carefully which firm you evaluate with, but choose the structure that lets you be bad at this safely, before you're forced to be bad at this expensively.